Hello and good morning. Welcome to Vision Makers. I'm here with Christina Balavich and Nikki Biardo is behind the scenes with us. And today we have the great pleasure of talking to my good friend, Ivor Crotty, who has had a super interesting career and path and is going to talk to us about many things digital and education. Ivor is currently the Deputy Director of Creative and Innovation for RT. He started working in Moscow in 2006 at the news agency RIA Novosti, and he then moved to advertising and then to RT. He became head of social media for the network in 2014, leading group relations with Silicon Valley, and set up the Russia Today digital reporting and user-generated content verification team in 2015. While he was running social, he created the biggest news production YouTube network in the world at the time. He also did many interesting things to verify user content, published interesting stories, and some educational programs that they put out on Twitter and other platforms, which I hope they'll talk about. Since 2018, he's been the deputy director. Ivor, I know you had kind of an interesting journey to digital media. Maybe you can talk a little bit about where you started and how you came to.
So far, so good, eh? Okay,
yeah.
you want me? So about digital specifically?
No, I want you to start on the factory floor. Yeah.
From the factory floor. Okay, all right. Yeah, so it's a long way. It goes a long way. This is like 1992. I'm Irish, yeah. So I think that gives us a pretty unique or a really interesting disposition towards the world. It's a really interesting time. Maybe we'll come back to this about education, but my laptop right now is standing on two books. One of them is Joseph Conrad, A Collected Works of Conrad, which he was a guy who protested against King Leopold of Belgium and all this statue stuff that's happening at the moment. I think it's really fascinating about how we've got to constantly reassess how we're educated and what we learn and be able to critique it. It's a really fascinating time that way. But anyway, so to go back.
Yeah, one interesting sideline is he also wrote a really interesting book about crisis management, which is called Typhoon.
That's true. That's so true. Coming out of Ireland in the 90s, Ireland this was very much pre-Celtic Tiger. Ireland was Prime Minister once described it as a second-rate knackers yard. So we our tradition was to emigrate. Yeah, and that's what we did. So those of us who didn't get into college or didn't get the places we want or whatever, like everybody would look to go to the States or to London or to Australia and follow the kind of diasporic pathways that had been set since kind of the mid-19th century or whatever. And that was still very much a thing in the late 80s, early 90s. So for various reasons, I tried working in finance as a young man. I didn't like it. And for various reasons, mostly to do with love, I found myself in Holland looking for a job in the 90s. And, this is before EU, yeah? So I had to get a visa. I had to go and, we spent guilders. There was no internet. We wrote letters, telephone calls were hideously expensive, all of that. Anyhow, so I managed to get there and really enjoyed myself. I met a lot of people. I was really blown away by the Dutch, about their multilinguality, about how kind of open-minded they were, kind of liberal yet conservative, kind of modern yet medieval. The really great juxtapositions, I think, in that culture, and also struggling with being a former empire, I think, and still working that through at the moment, I guess. One of the only jobs you could get really, if you didn't speak fluent Dutch, were working in factories. So I ended up working on the factory floor in a company called Davidson Marley, putting grills onto dashboards for Ford Mondeos. 600 a shift, night shifts, and I did that for about a year and a half. And there was a guy in the machine next to me. So I would take my grill out and I would lift up the dashboard and I would carry it over to the next machine. And the guy in the next machine, you had to time it. So like he's just lifted his out and he's taking it onto the production line where people would like do stuff with the dash and whatever, and it would go in this circular trolleys. And so me and Elmo, this guy, who's an Algerian guy, really, really bright as hell, a former pilot with the Dutch Postal Service. And you know, like Elmo had some problems and some issues, and so he got fired from the Postal Service, but he was bright as hell. Spoke 5-6 languages fluently. And we used to, you know, at 3 a.m. when you're on dashboard number 350, you know, we used to try and keep each other awake by asking each other general knowledge questions, and just asking each other, like, you know, geography questions or something. And it split out from there into, you know, anything that we knew, you know. And at some stage he just said to me, man, you know, you're just too bright. You should go to college. You know, you haven't been to college and you really should. You know, you're going to waste your life. Look at me, I'm 45, I'm blah, 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 you know, and I just got this talk from the guy that really struck me. It was really significant. And as luck would have it, in Ireland at the time, there was a kind of there was a coalition government. Things were liberalizing a little bit. And the Labour Minister for Education introduced this policy of government support for mature students. Mature, I was 25. You know, I applied and, you know, got randomly, you know, like a month later, rang a couple of colleges going, hey, how's it going? I'm working away in here in Amsterdam, just wondering if you guys have got me a place or anything. And University College Cork in Ireland said, yeah, your place there, you start in October. And I was like, okay, well, geez, boom. And life changed, you know, completely. My life direction absolutely, you know, altered massively, radically. So I went to UCC and studied, I took a joint honors arts degree in geography and sociology, which reflected my interests at the time. And both, you know, are still with me. You know, both elements are still with me. I still practice them, you know, and use them, or have recourse to them on a regular basis in the work that we do. So that brought me into UCC. I loved it. I ended up doing a master's in sociology and taking on a PhD in sociology, which I later abandoned because that was just too much. I think, you know, PhDs are for very special people, very special people. So, and I ended up during college, I'd gotten into radio and student radio. We won some prizes for the work we were doing there. And we came out of that. And I spent a couple of years basically as an educator working with students with disabilities. This is also part of the college program, and people who had the necessary wherewithal to be able to kind of engage with people and relate to people and deal with people who had various kind of, you know, from anything from people who were physically experiencing physical disability through to, you know, multiple personalities and all sorts of interesting things. You know, deaf people, blind people. A Kenyan girl, Jane, who was studying nursing and was deaf as a post. And she qualified in nursing, and I was her tutor for a couple of years as well, and working with her and an interpreter, and, you know, learning sign language and working in that way as well was fantastic. It was, you know, it's college, yeah, and like I think some people will just take an opportunity to broaden their minds, you know, and to grasp the opportunity, and it just did for me. You know, I just went for it naturally. I wanted to be there. I had experience of working in factories, and I knew why I wanted to be there. You know. Came out of that and then moved to Dublin, worked also in Trinity College, taught a sociology module there, and worked with the students with disabilities there, and started to get into news radio and then into investigative journalism. That's in 2005. 2004, I taught sociology in Western Ukraine in Lviv for a year with the Open Society Institute. Working for the Soros Foundation or whatever. That was fascinating. Lviv at the time, just before the first Maidan, that was 03, 04. So kind of Taktishenko was a very big deal and emerging. And I was really concerned about, you know, the kind of the ethno-linguisticism being kind of manipulated during that presidential election. I tried to write some warnings to the guys in Budapest around that, but I think it was too late by that stage. You know, they were already heavily invested in the program. But anyway, what happened afterwards was kind of, you know, depressingly predictable from my point of view. And certainly being Irish as well, we have an experience of that kind of post-coloniality and partition and you know, pockets of loyalty to the former empire in the country that's decolonizing, all this kind of stuff. You know, again, my geography and sociology had taught me well around that. Came back to Dublin, worked in investigative journalism. I loved that, absolutely loved it. I really wanted to be a journalist, I really did, until I became a journalist. And that was an experience. There was a political scandal around the work we were doing, around my boss at the center. It was modeled on the Center for Public Integrity in the United States, which is very well-known investigative journalism and kind of data hub. And I was really upset by the way that was handled. It seemed that basically the narratives from the Civil War that took place in 1922-23 in Ireland were just replaying themselves this time in 2005. So we were being doorstepped by journalists on our way into the office and being asked, two idiotic questions. One was, are you in the IRA, which is insane. And the second question was, why aren't you in the IRA? And that really reminded me when you're working in journalism and working around Donbass and Ukraine, and just being able to follow, being able to predict what's going to happen with the most depressing surety and certainty about what's next and how things were going to disintegrate was tough to follow second time around. But anyhow, the center was eventually closed, and by that stage I had been dating my then wife, and dating my wife, and then who was a Muscovite and who just dropped, do you fancy trying Moscow? And I had a very old friend here from the same village, whom we had basically been kind of best buddies from 16 through to about, when I left, until I left for Holland, I guess. He was in London by that stage. We were all emigrating or whatever. So I knew that there was a bit of a, there was a network here that I could tap into when I got here. And that made it easier to move. Not having Russian language at the time and stuff as well, I think was, that certainly scared me. That was definitely a challenge. I think that I still struggle to overcome. And then so came in. First job was with RIA. It was a joint thing run by Vedomosti and RIA. It was hosted in RIA, the Vedomosti guys and independent media. So Dirk Sauer and the guys, the guys were also co-running the project at the time. That was great fun, and I got an offer then to move into mobile advertising with a company called Gigaphone, who were a startup. This was 2008, just before the crisis, and as we all know, I guess, there was cash in Russia at that time, and people were ready to try things. So Ira Solovyova, who used to be, she was the former director of Interbrand Russia, hired me in to look after a community of about 150,000 people who were using this app. They would basically be shown advertising in order to receive discounts on offers or discounts on their mobile bills and stuff. And we were working with the mobile operators and stuff. And during that time, I really got a sense of what was going to happen to news. And I really felt it was really interesting, and that digital was about to completely disrupt what I felt was a highly institutionalized and kind of conservative industry. News is I think news to me is always, or the news industry is always a little bit about having it both ways. It's about having, on the one hand, being close to power, and on the other hand, offering a critique of it at the same time. And I think it has difficulty in finding where the Chinese walls are there and stuff with it. But it makes it a very interesting place to work. Certainly, during my time in news, it was fascinating. I ended up with Gigaphone in Singapore in 2009, selling tech we may not have had. It was being developed in Akadem Gorodok in Siberia, Novosibirsk, and ended up there when the call came. Said, okay, the gig's up. Sorry about that, man. You better come back. So came back to Moscow. At that stage, my first child was due on the way, and I picked up the first work I could get, which was with RT. Moved into started working in the TV newsroom for a couple of years and writing. So, for example, if you could picture at the bottom of this screen that there would just be a headline or a title.
Yeah. The cryon.
Yeah, exactly. And I was writing those and really enjoying it. This was the Medvedev era, the Medvedev-Obama era. So there was a certain positivity and progressiveness to the messaging around. I think at the same time they were like with NATO, there was talks about harmonization and sharing missile defense and all of this stuff that never happened. But it was fun to work, and I hadn't worked in the TV newsroom before, and I found that really interesting. I learned a lot about the TV medium, and it kind of confirmed some biases I had about the TV medium too. I think it's fair to say, it's very much one way. It's very much didactic, and I knew that what was coming with digital was going to completely change change the direction of the blood flow, in the corpus of news, and I was really into working in that. And so then I got the call from my now boss, the director of creative and innovation, Kirill Karnovich, who asked me if I would work with them on the YouTube side, and then that just like the tech was growing, the market was expanding. It was not all we had to do. I mean, we worked very hard, but if you did a good job, you were pretty much guaranteed an increase in your audience just by virtue of the fact that everybody was coming online and a lot of people were starting to watch this and starting to use these channels, discover news through it and consume news through it. And that brought us into then post Ukraine. Where we were, and then so the situation has changed radically. Then I mean, the ruble has collapsed. There's a brand toxicity around RT that was absolutely amplified post Ukraine. Through Ukraine. And we made the decision then to look offshore for market and look for the skill sets that we knew we were going to need to be able to build a new digital model that will someday maybe overtake the TV studio model and the TV news idea. So we moved we didn't move anything. We basically opened an innovation hub in Dublin, in Ireland. And there was a couple of reasons for that. One was the proximity to Facebook and Google, Twitter. They all, because of the tax breaks they get in Dublin, they all have their HQs there. But there was also a really couple of interesting news agencies that were developing digital methodologies. One of them, Storyful, was eventually sold to the Murdoch media empire for $25 million. After starting as a Dublin startup, it was a big success story run by a guy called Mark Little and a former CNN executive, David Clinch. And we knew we would be able to kind of, bring people in who had been in that ecosystem and be able to kind of import those skills and bring those skills in, and we did. And that eventually became something that we're really proud of, that now sits at the heart of the video discovery and verification center for the entire RT network. So that's one news agency that's based in Berlin called Ruckli, but that feeds video. They work in all 6 languages of the RT vertical. So French, German, Arabic, English, Russian, and Spanish. And so they're practicing that across those 6 language verticals and then feeding the video into the ostensibly six news agencies or 6 language verticals. Yeah, and then and basically around that time, jumped into education. Yeah.
Talk about the education stuff. Talk about, I know you guys have won something like 50 different prizes for the various.
Yeah. Okay.
And talk about that, because it's it's interesting to me. When you sort of moved over to that, it made perfect sense to me, because it really seems like the marriage of this new way of delivering information to people and your interest in sociology and geography and trying to understand things, not just because they happened yesterday, but because they're connected to things that happened 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
And Christina, you wanted to add something?
What are we required to teach our children in this modern world? And this question about education, I think that's main questions for all of us.
Sure.
What will happen to the education, and what is it supposed to be? It's everyone ask each other what we should do with our children and with us. Not about children. Yeah.
As parents, you know. Yeah, that's a question.
I think what Christine's saying is, as parents and as adult human beings who need to continue to learn also.
Want to continue educating.
Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think this perfectly matches with what you guys have been trying to do.
It does. Yeah? Well, yeah. I mean, that's certainly where we are right now. And it seems to be, you know, the initial feedback we're getting is that the market, there is a market there for it, and people are really interested in. There's a lot of people asking questions. Okay, so the background was that in 2014, we watched, Europe at the time was, can I say shit?
Yeah.
Yes.
Europe was in deep shit. Yeah. So Europe was, they were in, there was austerity. The pigs, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, Spain, Italy, the economy, like the initial idea of the European project was kind of starting to fall apart a little bit. I think there was a lot of disenchantment around what Europe is and around Brussels in particular. At the same time, there was a lurch into this kind of, the National Front were growing in France, people like Nigel Farage, and the Brexit sentiment was growing in the UK, the far right was growing in Germany, in Italy. They had a rightist government, and so there were a lot of, for me, as they were commemorating 100 years since the beginning of World War I thought that there was a lot of similarities between, the challenges that Europe was facing in 2014 and the kind of scenario in 1914. And we looked at the idea of doing some storytelling around that and doing some kind of real-time digital, engaging storytelling around kind of Russia's involvement in World War I. And we quickly realized that to be able to launch such a project was going to take more resources than we had at our disposal. But we then, so we shelved the idea. In 2016, we looked at the centennial commemoration of the Irish Rising in 1916, which eventually brought around the War of Independence, and then independence in 1922 and the Civil War in 1923. And some of that work that was being done was excellent. Sorry, guys. So we knew what was coming in 2017, the revolutions, and we wanted to do something. We were frustrated. We were frustrated with history, with the way things were going. We were frustrated with Silicon Valley and the tech. We had been wined and dined and feted, and guys, come and have a meeting with us on our beach in Cannes, and it will be beautiful, and blah 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 blah. As soon as Ukraine hit, we were suddenly the black sheep in the digital family. And then God Almighty, when Trump was elected, well, then it got 10 times worse. But there was a very clear politicization of Silicon Valley. The Democrats got their teeth into Silicon Valley, and we were persona non grata. And we realized that trying to succeed in the news industry in this sense and trying to grow in the way that we had been used to growing was a waste of time. And we looked for other ways then to demonstrate excellence, to cultivate excellence and innovation in the organization. And one of those then was around this idea of historical storytelling. So we decided to recreate 1917 in Russia in real time on Twitter for a year. So we built and researched and we took the visual verification methodology and the digital methodologies around journalism that we had developed, and we applied them to history. So we had mantras around source transparency, mantras around clarifying news, taking down any reports that prove to be untrue, being transparent with your audience, talking them through how you make decisions and how you even make editorial decisions in that sense, and giving the audience a sense of transparency into a newsroom, which newsrooms never do, never. They show you desks and tables and screens and flashing lights, but they never, ever. It's like the news industry demands transparency from every organization except itself. It demands transparency from the boardrooms of banks, and it would never, never allow the internal workings of its newsroom and the editorial decisions being made to be publicized. Now, although I have to say, some are blazing a trail around that, but anyhow.
Before you go on, I just want to say for our viewers, if you haven't checked this out, it's really an amazing, amazing thing. And it was especially fun to do in real time. What they did is they pretended that all of the people acting in 1917, that they had Twitter. And so you would wake up and the Tsar would tweet something, and, you know, a Bolshevik would and a Menshevik and a professor. And, you know, I remember,
is this going out on YouTube? This video is going to be posted on YouTube, isn't it? Well, we can post some links in the comments and people can check.
Okay.
We can just put it in the description.
But it's amazing, like seeing like Pavlov getting ready to go to work on the day of the most violence, you know, like hoping that the revolution isn't going to keep him from his laboratory. Like, but really, like, it's amazing thing, because even if you've read this history, all of a sudden it makes it alive for you. Because now you can understand that this history happened in real life, and in the same way that you're reading today what Elon Musk said on Twitter, you could be imagining that this was happening in St. Petersburg 100 years ago. It was a beautiful thing.
Well, it was a really fun project, and you know, Michael Ziegler also created something quite amazing around letters and diaries that was kind of contactly based. But we were coming from news, and Twitter was our platform. I mean, Twitter occupies a unique place in the news ecosystem. And always will. And we were Twitter guys, and we wanted to tell the story in a Twitter way. Michael and his team, you know, told a different kind of story in a different kind of way. So we started with, like, just very quickly, like, this was one of our first tweets. It was breaking news announcement of Rasputin's body had been discovered by the Neva. Nicholas II replies, "This was a heartless killing of a valued family friend who regularly helped my son and wife. Life won't be the same without him." French embassy reporting that the widespread jubilation amongst the general public following the announcement of Rasputin's death in Petrograd, etc. And so the whole thing starts to spin out, you know, and we had, there are QR codes on the book, so you can basically point your phone at the QR code and it will take you to the tweet online, and you can see, like, there's a map and there's breaking style and, you know, all of that. So the story just span out. You know, we started with like 2.5 guys in a newsroom doing it part-time. I was still in Dublin. And we ran it for about 2 or 3 months, and then out of the blue, we won a shorty for education in New York. We were blown away. You know, we were absolutely blown away. And we were like, man, we started this thing because we just love what we do, and we wanted to do something cool. And suddenly we're being recognized by peers we didn't even know we had. So we went to New York, we picked up the shorty, we flew back to Moscow, and we presented this beautiful big glass prize to our colleagues. And they looked at us, and, you know, initially the idea had been scoffed at in the newsroom, because at the time it was like, guys, we need reach, we need audience, we need engagement, you know, we just want numbers, you know, show us the social media bottom line. And we had long come to the realization that a numerical reading of social media performance misses everything. You know, it misses the whole idea of you know, actually switching someone on and engaging and communicating with someone and giving them the opportunity to discover themselves, you know, what the stories that they didn't know, or stories that they didn't know fully, or whatever. So, but this allowed us to generate internal resources, and we were offered then the chance, kind of like, you know, hey guys, so you know, would you want to talk to the video promo people about, you know, making a video promo for it? And maybe you'd like to, you know, maybe we could give you an extra person for half a day or something. And, you know, and it started to grow into what is now a 9-person creative and innovation team that I work on. So yeah, the project ran for a year. It involved there was live Q&As with the Tsar, with Lenin. Lenin was a particularly spectacular character in this, in that we had a Lenin tracker, so you could track his journey from Switzerland through Germany in real time. And he was tweeting about it and tweeting about being seasick on the trip into Scandinavia, and, you know, shopping in Stockholm. You know, the famous photograph of Lenin in Stockholm where he's kind of walking across one of the main streets. You know, all of that kind of stuff. We were using archival footage, and using, you know, we were working with the Russian State Archive at the time for documents, films, and pictures. So everything was verified. And we were able then to, you know, to present that to the audience in a way that was kind of realistic, but that the medium for the storytelling was dynamic. And, you know, so it's a little bit McLuhan-esque in that sense. The medium is the message in a way. So anyhow, we ran that for a year. We won a bunch of prizes, and by the end of that year, we were asked then if we'd like to set up a dedicated team, and we did. And at that stage, we were working on this project, which is Romanov's 100. This was based on 4,000 photos of the Romanovs, which they took themselves of their lives. You can find it at romanovs100.com. We worked intensely with these photographs. There's some amazing panoramas in here that are worth a look as well. This is Red Square back in the day. This was taken by one of the Romanovs, for example. We developed the storytelling around that across 4 social platforms. We worked on YouTube for documentaries. We did some Instagram posting. So basically, the princesses, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Alexandra, Anastasia, they were collectively known as OTMA. And so there was an OTMA account. And we basically we took their diaries and their letters and their day-to-day experiences, and we just asked, like, what, you know, if they were on Instagram, what would they do? You know what I mean? Princesses are on Instagram. Let's face it, Instagram's full of princesses. So we developed storytelling around that on Instagram. We did real-time Twitter and kind of, you know, told the absolute, like counted in detail the brutal and awful end to their lives, culminating in their murder and subsequent treatment. Basically mixing kind of explainer videos on YouTube where we would do things like, it's a little known fact that they had an elephant, they had a pet elephant. The Tsar had like the biggest collection of cars in the world. He had like 56 cars in his garage in Tsarski Selo. Like stuff like this, you know, and just like give people an opportunity to kind of experience the story in a different way. Now, what this in particular offers is there is an augmented reality app that was created specially for this book. So you can point your phone at it, download the app, point your phone at it, and a video will automatically play on your phone, or you can, like, this picture would turn into a series of slideshows that you can just scroll on your phone or your iPad or whatever again. And we're basically just using technology in a way that will allow people, you know, discover these stories rather than you know, in a different way. You know, like the kind of like, oh, I didn't know that. These small moments that would fill into what they call in the advertising, what they call the white spaces, where a user or a consumer is kind of waiting at a bus stop, or waiting for the metro, or traveling somewhere, or in an airport, or in between, I don't know, you know, whatever, having come from a walk and is just about to do, you know, clean the kitchen, you know, whatever it is. So we built that, and again, we've won a bunch of prizes for that, for both education, social good, augmented reality, innovation, and then moved into a project that this was the first project that we were specifically asked to do by RT, which was Pages of Victory, where we really got into some very high-end virtual reality storytelling. We brought 9 young Russian students to Auschwitz. We trained them in virtual reality illustration, and then we asked them to express their reactions to their visit to Auschwitz in virtual reality, in illustration.
Wow.
And we've just won a Webby for that project, which we're delighted with, which is really like the Webby is the Internet Oscars. That came through a couple of weeks ago. So let me come to education, Christina. And then, so while I'm doing this, I was given the opportunity then, well, internal training became really important. So we were working with video verification and this methodology, very simple, of just verifying the date, the source, and the location of any video that you work with, and then tell your audience how you do that, what tools you use to do that, and what steps you take, and who you consult when you do that. I think the idea of consultation and community is absolutely fundamental to the idea of successful pedagogical or educational experience in the digital world, in my opinion. I don't think it's something, I think it's something that can be done individually online, but I do think that this medium gives us an opportunity to participate in virtual communities of which we wouldn't have the opportunity to do otherwise. And I think that through those communities, we have the opportunity to learn in a much more Socratic way. So it's much more about Socratic method than about didactic method and you know, kind of giving students kind of like, here are books and here are readings, now go and read them and go and write something. There's an opportunity to discuss and to do background research in real time, and rather than have to post, you know, immediately or speak immediately in a classroom situation, you can take your time and kind of practice, do a step by step, and kind of, there's a different kind of methodology to online education. But we started really getting involved, seriously involved in training in RT. There was a clear realization there that a new skill set was needed, you know, really badly needed, in order to secure the, you know, in order to secure the kind of personnel pipeline in the network more than anything else. So we started training around social media there, and my first, like, you know, these were workshops. So, you know, you're at the top of a room, and there's 25 people in the room, and you know, I would start always with a warning about well-being and digital media. I think it's very, very important to start with that caveat when we're talking about digital and social media, and to try and give people a sense of, you know, how to use these tools properly, because I think everybody just thought it's, you know, and the message clearly from Facebook and YouTube and Twitter at the time was just like, hey, use more social, you know. But people were, you know, were experiencing, you know, during Ukraine, for example, you know, Donbass, and other, you know, anywhere, Syria as well. You know, people who were working on social media desks and discovering discovering videos found themselves really traumatized by what they would see. You know, and there were no support mechanisms in place for people who were sitting, like, they're sitting at a desk in Moscow on a computer. You know what I mean? And half the time they're posting into Facebook and moderating comments and, you know, writing in emojis or whatever, and then suddenly they're being presented with the reality of a war, and you know, it being reported and recorded in a different way to pretty much any war before, and certainly any war, let's say in the post-Soviet space or in the Slavic space. You know, nothing like that had happened before, with the level of the sheer quantity of video that was coming through, and horrifying video. So we realized that we needed to put support mechanisms in place and to value and emphasize wellness from that point of view. And we then again took a lead from what the guys doing were Dublin, and that, you know, and that you would make kind of, you know, psychological support available. People would be told, you've got to walk away from the desk now for half an hour, because social can trigger you. You know, people can get really mad, you know, and people can really lose their temper on social. You know? And you need to be able to remind people, and you need to give them mantras that they don't get emotionally involved, you know, in arguments and in fighting and in, you know, in losing friends, etc. You know, I think it's important to be able to give people a kind of realistic assessment of what's actually possible. So education would always start with a warning, and then a talk through each of the platforms, and each platform has a kind of personality to it. Twitter is definitely a son of a bitch. You know, Instagram is very much about appearance and what we would call exhibition value. Twitter is Twitter has a more of a cultish value to it. YouTube again is YouTube split into YouTube Kids, which is interesting and somewhat concerns me, to be honest with you. But and say YouTube for grown-ups. The recommendations engines that they use there, I think, are something that we all need to be careful of, and you need to again warn people about that and say that, like, the videos that you're being proposed are not happening by accident. This is an algorithm that's pushing you content in the belief that you will click because it wants more money, and just make these things clear that it's not just about you know, beautiful content and inspiring stories or you know, cartoons or videos of your favorite bands, whatever. So we will go through that.
Ivor, just to pause just for 1 second. This is a very interesting thing that you raised. I know you have two, you know, both of your daughters are quite young, but, you know, I imagine Zoe is already getting into the social media. And I'm wondering, how do you teach your kids these same lessons about how to deal with the emotion that's in Twitter or on YouTube? Yeah. I mean, you know, I look at the George Floyd murder online, and it makes me weep. Like, you know, it's crazy. So I'm wondering, how do you teach your young kids as they begin to enter this whole new ecosystem of information, the same things that you wanted to teach your colleagues.
Yeah. Can I add something? Is there any way help people identify fake resources from real one? It's how?
Yeah, another question.
Yeah.
There is, Christina. I mean, there are mantras that you can recite to yourself and recite to others. One is, in my opinion, is to start from the a priori position. The wisest a priori position is to believe nothing, believe absolutely nothing, until you have seen a second source or a third source. Accept nothing. You know, the days, particularly in news, the days, you know, in the old television days, everybody got their news from, everybody had their own channel that they would like to get news. This is the TV station I watch, and this is the newspaper I buy, and that is the sum total of my news. Digital completely disrupted that, as Walter Benjamin said in The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. Then came the sound film and burst this world asunder. So you can. My advice would be well, nobody consumes news, I think, or very few people consume news from one channel in the digital era. You know, and I think it's very, very important that you know, and certainly from RT, we would say, you know, we don't see ourselves. We don't think people should get their news exclusively from RT. You know, as Margarita Simonian would say absolutely the same thing. We don't think you should, yeah? We are a voice, a brand in the market, and there is a spectrum of opinion, positioning, politics, bias, all around that news industry, right across that rainbow spectrum. And it's very, very important to consult a variety of opinion around that. You know, if you're looking at international news, it could be, you know, maybe from a Russian position, RT is interesting, but maybe, you know, Al Jazeera would be an interesting channel to take from the Gulf perspective, and then maybe something from the Anglophonic space, perhaps a BBC, perhaps a Euronews, perhaps a you know, perhaps a CNN or a Fox or an NBC from America. But you know, basically, not to over rely on one source is really important. Secondly, if you've actually been presented with a video that might not necessarily be from a recognized news channel, then you can undertake a number of steps to verify that video if you like. But you can also ask, you know, and it's okay to ask, you know, and stick it on Facebook or stick it on Vkontakte and go, Ребята, you know, что такое? Is it, you know, is this you know, is this true? Can anyone verify? And people are very loath to do that, I think, because people don't necessarily like to express a vulnerability or humility sometimes in digital to people who they kind of know. But at the same time, communities can be built around that. And you'll find that there is a community of very helpful people who will be more than willing to come in and verify that for you. Because, for example, people like Losha Kovalyov, who works at Medusa, great guy, and always willing to have a look behind something for somebody and give them a sense of this is, you know, this has been taken out of context, or this video looks like this, but actually it's this way, or whatever, that kind of stuff, you know. We always, like in the newsroom, we work on the 3 pillars of date, source, and location. So you verify the date just by taking screenshots of the video and Google searching with those screenshots and seeing if these pictures come up. Google will find it. There are other tools developed by the EU called InVid that are also very helpful for that. And it's a Chrome extension, and you basically just click it when you've got the video on, and it goes off and does automatic searching for you and allows you verify. Verifying the source involves looking at the digital footprint of the source and looking for consistencies in how they post. And looking for red flags in how they might post as well. And location is much more complicated, and that can involve things like satellite mapping. It's very often not simply resolvable on Google, you know, and you might have to go to things like Wikimapia, Bing Maps, or indeed go to one of the satellite photo agencies and ask them if they can help you locate. And they can, and they do that as well. So as far as news is concerned, I think that's very important. But otherwise, if it's TikTok, if it's Snapchat, if it's Instagram, if it's Twitter, if it's Facebook, and you're shocked or you're taken aback and you don't know if what you're seeing is real or not, believe it not to be real until it is proven otherwise. And then ask. Simply ask or have a look, or Google around it, you know, and have a look and you get context. But I would highly recommend that that we practice skepticism and we teach our children skepticism around pretty much everything they see, because everything they see on YouTube or 90% of what they see has been manufactured, especially for that content. If you look at, Zoe told me about a young Russian blogger who has millions of followers on Instagram, and look, they send her all these things, and it's amazing and stuff, and you had to sit down with her and talk to her and go like, well, this is how it happens. First of all, they're using special lighting, they're filming these scenes, and they're editing these scenes. They're not just, and then they have these commercial relationships with these organizations who want to put their products into the videos, and they're being paid lots of money to do it, and that's how it works. And they'll go, oh, okay. So if I become a YouTube, I want to become a YouTube blogger. And you go, okay, if you want to become a YouTube blogger, well, this is how you're going to have to do it. So first of all, learn to edit. Yeah, open up your iMovie or download Pinnacle on your phone. It's a great app for making simple videos, and learn to edit. And then work, buy yourself a light and buy yourself a microphone and start there. If you really, really, really want to do it, and of course, by the time they get to video editing, most of them will realize that
they're not interested.
This is not necessarily for them. They might prefer to go skipping or something like that. It was one of the other interesting moments I had as a father in that sense was to bring the girls to the TV studio in RT and to show them how television was made and how TV news was made. That it doesn't just happen, that it's a product of this long production pipeline, and that really helped open their eyes as well. So I think some kind of informed skepticism is definitely a good way to take it. I think we need to talk about also with children. It's not that I do it, but I always on a regular basis. But if there's any detection that a young person, particularly let's say it's a young teenager or someone, an adolescent or someone who's in puberty or whatever, if they're experiencing loneliness or they're experiencing any form of alienation, I think it's really, really important that it be explained to them that technology will only enhance, like a reliance and an investment in mediatized relationships will only enhance that alienation rather than, they need to put the thing down and get up and look up and walk away and go for a walk. And I'm very conscious of that with my own children. And I know, most parents I know are very conscious of that. And as parents, we always, there is the eternal guilt of the parent. And a parent will always feel guilty about I let them do it too much, and Jesus, what am I doing? And but we know our children. I think we know our children, and I think as long as you're invested in it, and as long as you're tracking it, I think you can manage it and keep it at manageable levels. So yeah, like that. To demystify the background of the video is a great idea, I think, for young children. Or for young people, to give them a sense of actually what's going on there, and to do the same then with news, but use that through education has been kind of something that I tend to do on a more professional basis.
I'm sensitive that we don't have that much time, and it really flies during these great conversations. To return a little bit to Christine's question about education, I know you spend a lot of time and are working with museums and other partners about education. Where do you see education online, digital education? Where does this go from here?
Well, so on the education side, we work with Vishka in Moscow. So we teach video verification and a master's digital journalism master's module there, and I'm really, really proud of doing that because those kids are amazing. Come out of there after a class and you're just inspired by this generation of 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds, and the talents they have. Compared to what we were looking at 20 years ago, 15 years ago, certainly, it's amazing. As far as working, so we developed a methodology for historical storytelling. What we're seeing at the moment in the museological space is that particularly, I think, in Eastern Europe, there is a tendency for museums to be somewhat orthodox, to be a little nationalistic, to tell stories in a very kind of orthodox and patriarchal way. Very much the top-down narrative dictates how a museum will tell a story around the war, the occupation, the revolution, whatever. What we're working on at the moment is a series of modules that train museum curators who are skeptical about social media, who see it as kind of, dishevli popularnost. Yeah, they see it as easy popularity and meaningless. But what we're doing is taking the methodology that we've built around our work with 1917 Live and Romanov's 100, and basically making that available to museums who are interested in retraining staff or building capacity with staff. Particularly because, let's face it, after 4 months of lockdown, all of those museums are in serious financial difficulty right now. And many of them, it's estimated, the last survey numbers from NEMO in the States estimate that up to 30%, of museums globally will not open, will not reopen. But on the other hand, every museum is starting to invest in a stronger digital presence, so a stronger presence online, because they realized that without it, they can't build a brand in the online world, and they can't compete for audience, and they can't try to get people to come to the museum. So what we're trying to do is build a series of modules at the moment for these people to encourage them to embrace some of the capacity of social. Let me give you an example of the kind of the model that we might look at. It's about flipping how a story is told and about flipping the narrative. So we're not telling a story from the top down. We're telling story from sideways in or from the bottom up. Everybody's had enough of top-down stories. Social media is there to usurp top-down stories and always will. And I'm very proud of social media, of working in social media, because it does that, because it helps tell multiple stories, multiple narratives from multiple perspectives. So let's say there's there's a guy in a town in it's not a capital, it's a second city in, I don't know, whatever, or there's someone in Belgrade who has medals from the war, yeah, and wants to show the medals from the war. And so they go to the culture ministry and they go, I have medals. Let's show the medals from the war. And the culture ministry goes, oh, it's the war. Let's show the medals from the war. We have to show the medals from the war. And so they buy some glass cases and they rent a space and they call it the Medal Museum. And the medals go in a glass case, and then at the bottom of the glass case there's a plaque that explains this is a bravery medal awarded in 1992, whatever, or 1944, whatever. Yeah. And someone goes to the museum and they see a medal and they see another medal and they see another medal, and they ask themselves, well, I saw some medals. Afterwards they'll come out and go, well, I saw some medals. And maybe they'll buy a t-shirt from the, a medal t-shirt. Maybe they'll buy a fake medal, and they'll come out of the museum and someone goes, so Dan, what about those medals? And you go, yeah, medals.
Yeah.
It's like I saw several. I saw several medals. I mean, some of them were really nice.
Yeah.
And
absolutely agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. But what if you went and said, so this is a story about Ivor, John, and Paul, and they grew up together in the same town outside Belgrade, and they worked on a farm, and they found themselves, getting into, they were caught up in this whole thing, and next thing you know, the guys are at war, and there are, and maybe we could maybe you can tell a story in a different way. You can tell a story about people rather than telling a story about the artifacts. And what you're doing there is you're moving again from the cult value of an artifact through to the exhibition value of an artifact. So it's a bit Instagrammy, you're showing it, but you're also taking it one step further, and you're telling human stories in empathetic ways that are non-judgmental, and you're allowing people discover those stories for themselves also. So you're giving people an opportunity to discover as much of that story as they want. And they'll learn about a person and their experience. And they'll learn about that person and the experience, even though that person was fighting for the bad guys or for the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to build an empathetic storytelling model around that. And that is the absolute kind of focus of our work, and that's what we're trying to bring about. And so building online modules around that is a way of doing that, simply because it's you know, we can't travel, huh? So this is just a necessity. So what we try to do is introduce, by way of anecdotes and by way of kind of, you know, stories like that, we introduce people to the idea of kind of a more empathetic and a broader storytelling, less didactic, particularly curators who have huge knowledge, you know, huge knowledge, but all they know is how to tell the story from the top down. This is the Mask of Nefertiti, you know, and we all know the Mask of Nefertiti. But did you know that the Germans stole it? Is that in the Bundesmuseum in Berlin? No, it's fucking not, you know. But now I'm interested, you know. So they smuggled it out of the country. They found it in the guy's art. They found it in the guy's studio, and they smuggled it out of the country, and they won't give it back. Like, now I'm interested. Now I've got a story, you know. Like it's an extraordinary thing in the last case, whatever. But so again, I think working with digital helps us disrupt. Like, if digital disrupts these meta narratives, I mean, we're living in the world of the disruption of the meta narratives anyway. So, but if digital disrupts these narratives, or digital storytelling and social media allows us to do that, well then, you know, the idea of building new stories around what we know already and rewriting history, Dan and Christian, rewriting history. You know, let's take down the, like, you know, the kids are asking why is that statue of Leopold being taken down in Belgium? What's the story? You know, what's the problem with that? And or you know, go over to Tretokovskaya and ask, like, why are all those busts of Stalin and Lenin lying around in the grass? You know, and it's an opportunity to basically for people to build capacity. It's for that capacity to be spread and distributed in an easy way. And at the same time, you know, like, have at our core a commitment to more empathetic storytelling in general, and hopefully less war. Yeah. Like so.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Ivor, according to you, what is the digital world, and what events will occur in it? What do you think?
From an education point of view, Christina?
No, whole of world. I guess that whole planet shift into the digital, or divided into between an energy world and digital world. I'm not sure, but something happened. A huge events happened, and a lot of we can see and conscious what happens. According to you, what is the digital world for you?
For me,
what does it mean?
For me, it's absolutely all about building capacity and educating and communicating. I don't see it as you know, political change will not happen online. It will be communicated online, but it won't happen online. It has to happen in real life. Love, you know, won't happen online. You can't, you can't make love online. You know, so I think we need to recognize the profound limitations, and I think of the medium which we're dealing with, you know, and which is changing lives. But I do believe that for me, primarily, it is a medium of communication and education. And that's it for me, you know. After that, like gameplay, fine. People learn, but at the end of the day, you're communicating, you know. So like anything beyond that, you know, I think we need to recognize the limitations of what we're doing, close the laptop and you know, go for a walk, go and enjoy the Moscow sun. So I think education is huge. And if you have a look at the market, it's amazing right now. I mean, you know, every video you watch is followed with an ad. Somebody's offering drawing classes, sewing classes, you know, graphic design. Online universities are thriving again. You know, I think on the one hand, people are realizing that if you're working in an innovative space, and I think that has a lot to do with your own personal values and how you value. Like, I'm not saying I value my life more than somebody else, but it's just about the kind of life that I want for myself, and I want to work diagonally. And I want to work in innovative, and I want to work in creation and education. And I think if you're, you know, if you're working in those spaces, then you're already resigned to the idea that you will have to constantly upskill, and you will have to constantly learn anew. And what I think we saw with news media, certainly from 2005 to 2015, was an enormous disruption of that space. And executives who had always been fine journalists and fine editors with the contacts book and knowing everybody and, and being able to generate stories and be operate excellently as journalists in that space, we're having real trouble competing in this new environment, because the news industry is basically giving away content for free, and it's there's too much. There's just too much out there, and I think they found that people just found themselves completely alienated by the quantity and the quality of information that's being generated. And so for me, very much less is more. Education is crucial, and substantive, empathetic communication that recognizes the limits of communication. So the idea we need to be really conscious of the idea that when we are speaking, we three, for example, we are dealing with phenomena like present absence and absent presence, for example.
Yep.
And read about the psychology of communication and mediatized communication, and work with that and recognize it, so we don't get off after a call of 2 hours or a Zoom meeting or whatever it is and feel dizzy and feel disorientated or whatever. We need to recognize that this medium has limitations. But for education, I think the sky is the limit, because on the one hand, we will never be able to deliver 1 hour lectures to like in a way that a university professor would deliver a lecture, like online. You're going to lose people after 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So it's always going to be short kind of explainers, and then an emphasis on Socratic method. So giving people the tools with which they can discover and learn, and then helping them reflect on that learning practice. That's going to be the kind of the structure of the education model in that sense.
Well, Ivor, I want to thank you for taking us on a journey that began with a young man sending love letters to Holland.
Making dashboards, if anybody needs a dashboard, give me a call. You need your dashboard.
And ends in the world of Tinder, right? I mean, this is where we've come in our own lives, and it really shines through. We haven't even talked about music, and I know a lot of the times when you want to connect away from you pick up your guitar. Ivor's a very talented musician, but I really, it's for me, it's there's two things that I just want to emphasize. One is, there is this sort of demonization, especially in the US, about RT, and I think it's really amazing to pause and talk about all of the sort of innovative things you're talking about, which are the opposite of what people think. It's all about being skeptical about information, discovering things and learning. And the second thing is, bringing to this digital world, which is, quite frightening for many of us, your soul and your heart. And so, thanks for sharing with us. It was really wonderful to hear your story.
My pleasure. I'm delighted to talk. Yeah, let's put some, I'll send you some links and we can put them in the, let's put absolutely. Them in the explainer. But it's delightful to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.